London has always been a city of thresholds, but none were as narrow, as wealthy, or as dangerous as the Docklands. Today, these are luxury flats and quiet riverside paths. But in the 19th century, this was the mouth of an empire, a place where the wealth of entire continents was swallowed by the Thames. In this journey, we're using AI to peel back the layers of Victorian engravings. We're moving from the macro, the massive engineering feats that created the wealthiest square mile on Earth, to the micro, the desperate shadow world of the men and children who lived in the cracks of these great stone walls. To understand London, you have to understand the docks, because here the smell of expensive tobacco met the stench of low-tide mud. Look at this horizon. This is the Pool of London. By the mid-1800s, this was the busiest port in the world. It was a logistical miracle and an architectural fortress. Because the river was so congested with ships from India, China, and the Americas, London had to carve giant basins out of the earth itself. The West India Docks, the East India Docks, the St. Catherine Docks, these weren't just ports, they were high-security city-states. Look at the scale of these perimeter walls. They were built 20 feet high, not just to hold the weight of the earth, but to keep the starving population of London away from the cargo. Inside these walls lay a treasure map of the globe. Hogsheads of sugar from the Caribbean, crates of tea from Fujian, bales of raw silk from Bengal, and ivory from Africa. This was the engine of the British Empire. This square mile generated the capital that built the grand spires of Westminster and the boulevards of Mayfair. From this height it looks like a masterpiece of Victorian progress, orderly, powerful, and inevitable. But history is not a map. It is a lived experience. If we descend from the clouds and move past those great stone walls, the perspective shifts. The miracle of logistics turns into a hive of survival. As we animate this scene, notice how the air changes. Above the walls, the air smells of salt and wind. Down here, in the narrow alleys of Wapping, the air is a toxic cocktail. It is heavy with the scent of curing tobacco and unwashed wool, mixed with the damp sulphurous rot of the river mud. This is the call-on. For the Victorian docker, life was measured in 4-hour increments. There was no such thing as a permanent job. Every morning at 7:03 a.m., thousands of men would gather at these iron gates, literally fighting for a day's work. Notice the man in the centre of the frame. We'll call him Thomas. He hasn't eaten since yesterday. He stands in what the locals called the cage. When the foreman walked out to the grill, he didn't look for the best worker. He looked for the strongest. He would throw small metal tickets into the crowd, and the men would scramble, kick, and bite to catch one. To catch a ticket was to eat. To miss one was to face another night in the casual ward or the street. The work Thomas is fighting for is brutal. If he gets in, he will spend 12 hours carrying 200-pound sacks of grain or raw sugar on his back up steep wooden ladders. The lumpers and stevedores were the human machinery of the warehouse. Their lungs were filled with grain dust and coal soot. Their spines were often curved by middle age. The empire moved on their shoulders, yet the empire didn't even know their names. The docks didn't just employ men. In the shadow of the warehouses, the sweatshops of Wapping were the auxiliary engines. Here, women worked 16-hour shifts in rooms with no ventilation, sewing the very sails that brought the ships into port. But even lower than the sweatshops were the mudlarks. To the wealthy merchants in the macro view, the Thames was a highway. To these children, the river was a monster that occasionally offered a gift. They waited for low tide to search the toxic sludge for anything that dropped from the ships, spilled coal, old rope, copper nails, anything they could sell for a farthing. Look at the contrast. Directly above these children sits a warehouse containing £10 million worth of fine Chinese silk and rare spices. The children are barefoot in the filth, literally walking on the human bones of the city, while the scent of the world's most expensive tobacco drifts out of the windows above them. One world is built on the other, but they are separated by a threshold that was almost impossible to cross. When we look at these old engravings, it's easy to get lost in the grandeur. The world's warehouse, the forest of masts, the logistics of empire. Those things are real. They are the infrastructure of our modern world. But through these AI reconstructions, we also see the Thomases, the sailmakers, and the mudlarks. Their stories are the DNA of London. They remind us that every great city is a machine, and for centuries that machine was fueled by human struggle. By bringing these images to life, we make sure that the people who lived in the shadows are never truly erased. If there is another part of the city's anatomy you want to explore, the prisons, the theatres, or the sewers, let me know in the comments. Thank you for walking the thresholds of history with me. Subscribe to keep exploring the vanished world,